Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by The Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to this episode of the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. Fresh back from Mobile, Alabama. Had a play for my son today, so that kind of delayed the daily podcast until tonight. But what I'm going to do is demonstrate how the interactive simulator works. And specifically, I'm going to go through, and some fans have given some feedback. Hey, I think my team's going to pick this player, or I think my team should pick this player. So I'm going to go through and show you how I will manipulate team boards, and fans can do this too. This is not specific to me. So even though I've designed the simulator, the functionality I'm using, anybody watching this podcast could do, and you could even do this while I'm doing it. So this is just meant to have some fun and show you how fans can mock draft against other fans. So I'm going to go into the mock draft simulator, and I'm going to do single player drafts. And the way that I'm going to modify everybody's mock draft is this thing right here called the second round challenge. Okay. A second round challenge is 10 unique 2-round drafts. Okay. And the rules for a second round challenge are every second round pick has to be unique. That doesn't have any rules about the round 1 pick. So for example, I had a Vikings fan come in and say, well, hey, I think we're taking Nick Emenwari in round 1. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go find the Vikings. We're going to do a second round challenge. And what we're going to do is we're going to do 10 2-round Vikings mock drafts. The ironic thing is the Vikings, without having a second round pick, this is going to go really fast because all I have to do is make 10 first rounds. And I'm going to pick Emenwari every time. So Emenwari is there. And he was 38th on the player board at the time I picked him. So it goes through the round 1, and now it's going through the round 2. It's going to finish that draft. And then I'm going to go through and do the same thing all over again. So again, Emenwari, when I picked him, was the 38th player on the Vikings board. And he was the 19th top player. So there were 19 players ahead of him. Okay. He's already moved to 30 and 12. So I'm going to pick him again. Okay. So as the simulator is going through doing this, and again, this one's going to be really simple because the Vikings don't have a second round pick. This was a really good warm up, but literally that tweet came in maybe minutes before I put on the podcast, is that I think I think that person liked Emenwari over Jahdae Barron in round 1. So notice how Emenwari in just me picking him twice has gone from 39 to 26 on the board. Okay. So every single time I pick Emmanwori goes up. Now, how high is he going to go up? That's the algorithm. I don't really disclose that. But what I will say is that Emmanwori goes up, and anybody that was higher than Emmanwori on the board moves down slightly. Okay. And then it ranks the players based upon that value. So I've picked Emmanwori at this point 3 consecutive drafts. Notice now Emmanwori is the 6th best player on the Vikings player board. Okay. So again, I'm going to pick Emmanwori again. And this is the 4th of 10 consecutive 2-round mocks that I'm doing. Okay, and it goes through round 1, then it goes through round 2. And again, Vikings don't have a round 2 pick, so this one goes pretty fast. Emmanwori is now the 4th best player available on their board. And essentially, what you're going to do in a second round challenge is in the first round, pick the player you want to move to the top. And then you'll have to pick a player in round 2 and just do your, who do you like in round 2? And I'm going to go through that with a couple of other teams here in a minute. Okay. So he moves up into the top 8 quickly. There's no guarantee that if you pick somebody 10 times, they're at the top of the round 1 board. That just doesn't happen. If the player was close, 10 times should do it. But Emmanwori was, being the 19th best player close, there's a mid-term there. So you can see I've gotten him all the way up to number 2. And then I have to get him higher than Colston Loveland here. So I've picked him 7 straight times. I picked Emmanwori 7. I've done 7 mocks where Emmanwori was the number 1 pick. And at this point, he's only the top. He's one of the top 2 players that's available when the Vikings are on the clock. Okay. And you can see this time, James Pierce was higher. So one time it was Colston Loveland, one time it was James Pierce. Every team on this simulator has their own player board. And with the way a second round challenge algorithm works, you can see different players are falling to the Vikings each time. I have to be able to get Emmanwori high enough that no matter who's dropping, basically the way I would say it is that if I can get Emmanwori to 14th and have the guys like Pierce and Loveland drop to 15 and 16, that's success. So it's a combination of Emmanwori has to move high enough, as well as the players above him have to just decrease in value enough that they are below Emmanwori. And you can see again, Emmanwori is moving up a little bit. And the question would be, did I move him up enough? And I'll show you a couple of other techniques if you need to kind of polish it at the end. So I've picked Emmanwori. You can look across the top here. I've picked him, in this case, 10 straight times. Okay. It's a very ordinary 2-round mock, like I said, because the Vikings don't have a second-round pick. You can see his grades improve as he moves up the board, but his grade was never an A+, which means he was never the highest player on their board. Okay, so there's a couple different things I can do to try to see. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this thing right here called the first round Fanatic Challenge. I'm going to pick the Vikings again, A first round challenge is 5 unique 1-round drafts. So in this case, I can't pick Emimori more than once because the first rounds have to be unique. So what I'm going to see here, okay, so you notice Loveland is higher than Emimori. So let's pay attention to the fact that Loveland is 14th. What I need is to never pick Loveland and see if I can get Loveland to drop to 15th on the board. So one of the guys I'll pick was Emimori. One of the other players I'll pick for the Vikings would be Xavier Watts. So if the Vikings need safety help, and that's what this fan was thinking, I think Watts would be another good pick. And notice he's 53rd on their player board here. Okay. And again, you can see Pierce. Would the Vikings take Pierce over Emimori or Watts? So let's talk about corners. So in round 1, I do like Azareye'h Thomas, so I'm going to pick him. I do think the Vikings need corner help. Okay. And you notice, again, Pierce is 13th. Would they take Luther Burden? I don't think they would take either player. I'm going to look at the corner board again. So I'm going to go Maxwell Hairston in round 1. That's late round 1. I think that's appropriate for Hairston. Okay. So in this case, I've done Emimori, Watts, Thomas, Hairston, and watch what the simulator does. So this is the 5th Vikings first round mock I'm doing. The players that I took are the 4 players that are taken immediately before the Minnesota pick. Okay, so think of a first round challenge like this. I want Emimori, but let's say a team trades up to go get him. I want Watts. Different team traded up to go get Watts. I want Thomas. Different team traded up to go get Thomas. I want Hairston. Different team traded up to get Hairston. What would you do if it does that? And then notice, like in that case, Siobhan Ravel actually fell, okay? And I think that would be a really good pick. He was never available before. And again, the reason why is that you have to let the simulator put those 4 guys before your pick, and then maybe a guy drops that you didn't expect to be there. So I don't know if I got Emimori all the way to the top. There's a couple different ways I could go figure that out. I could go to the team needs section of the site, and every team on this simulator has their own player board. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go to the Minnesota player board, and I want to take a look at it. Okay, so I'm looking for the Vikings. I'm going to go to their player list. And this is the order the simulator is feeding the players to the Vikings. So you can see Graham is there, Burden's there. And then you can see Will Campbell, Cam Ward, James Pierce, Nick Emimori right here. So I do have Emimori higher than Loveland. I don't have Emimori higher than Pierce. So if James Pierce isn't taken before the Vikings pick, he would be the player that goes to the Vikings based upon the simulator algorithm. Okay. But I have Emimori higher than Loveland, Stewart, Nolan. You can see Ravel. You can see Amos there. And notice in this case, it's saying Amos, because fans have picked him, is higher than Scourton. And you can even see higher than Harmon. You can see Maxwell Hairston here, which was one of the players I picked. You can see Darian Porter there, right? So fans have control based upon the mock drafts that you do. Okay, so let's go reset another team's board. So I'm going to do a single player mock. This one's going to be a little bit harder from the standpoint of I have to make 2 picks. But I am going to go for the Baltimore Ravens, and I'm going to do a second-round challenge. So, again, the best way to modify a team player board is a second-round challenge. 10 unique two-round drafts. So, for the Ravens, I want to get Donovan Jackson, guard from Ohio State, to the top of their player board. Okay. And if we look, see how Emimori went to Minnesota? We just did that about 15 minutes ago. Okay. So that's how Emimori goes there. Okay. So let's look at the guard list. So you see Donovan Jackson is currently 13th. He's the 13th best player on the Ravens board. So I'm going to pick Donovan Jackson round 1. Now, what would the Ravens do round 2? I'm thinking wide receiver, and I'm thinking corner if they go guard. So you can see Azareye'h Thomas. If Azareye'h Thomas drops to pick 59, are they going to take him? I think yes. So I'm going to pick him there. Okay. So some of these are going to be really easy because if a player drops, you just grab them. Like you're saying, well, there's no way that player is going to drop to round 2. It's the way the simulator works is that if fans haven't picked Azareye'h Thomas to put him high enough on a team's board, he may not be high enough on other teams' boards to go in round 2. So again, I'm going to go guard. You can see Donovan Jackson's 5th best player available. I'm going to keep picking Donovan Jackson until I see him at the top. Okay. And then in round 2, I'm looking for best player available, probably corner or wide receiver. Okay, so Darian Porter there to the Ravens in round 2. Okay, so a second-round challenge is 10 unique two-round drafts. In this case, I have done 2 of the 10. Okay, and you can see Donovan Jackson, he's moving up slowly. Okay, so each time I pick a player in any round, they move up the board a little. Okay, it will generally, if a player is all the way at the bottom of the draft card, if they're like the 400th player, it'll usually take about 30 mock drafts to get them to go all the way to the top of round 1. So, okay, so let's look at the corner board. Might be too early for Riley. I'm looking to see if there's any other corners I would consider. Noel Williams, round 2, I would definitely do. And ultimately, this is how you implement your player board. So, a lot of the discussions on Twitter today were, Jack Bech, Trey Harris, who do you like better? So let's talk about that for a minute. So I'm going to go Donovan Jackson. He's already moved up to the 21st spot on the Ravens player board. Okay. So I'm going to pick him again. And I'm going to verify the corner board. I'm not going to go Burke there. Okay, so let's look at the wide receiver board. Okay, so Trey Harris, you can see he's 10th. So I'm going to pick him to the Commanders, to the Ravens in round 2. Okay, so at this point, I have done 5 of the 10 unique two-round drafts, which make up a second-round challenge. You can see Donovan Jackson is now the 20th best player on the Ravens board. Okay. And if I'm looking at these players, who do I think helps the Ravens the most? I think they need downfield. So I'm going to say I do like Emmanwori to the Ravens. So I am going to pick him there. And then it looks like there's been a lot of Ravens drafts because I actually liked the way that board looked. And I'll explain this as we kind of go through. Okay, so what else would the Ravens do with interior line? So we can see Donovan Jackson's at the top. Okay, Savanea or Banks? I like Savanea over Banks. So I'm going to see if I can get Savanea to be higher than Banks. So I'm actually going to play a little bit of a game here and see if I can push Banks down just a little bit more. I'm not a huge fan of Kelvin Banks in round 1 right now. And if you watch Locked On Scouting with Kyle and Joe, they actually kind of agreed with that take a little bit. So in this case, Trey Amos fell out of round 2 to the Ravens. I really like that pick to the Ravens in round 2. So when you do a second round challenge, pay attention to who's at the top of the board in round 2. The second round challenge has a way of pushing players down. So I'm going to, again, go Savanea so he goes higher than Banks. So even though I was looking at wide receivers, Amos was never there before. When he was there, I definitely wanted to pick him, so he stayed at that part of the draft card. Okay. So would they go Bond, Fannin, Felton? So in this case, I'm going to say I like, let's say, Ty Felton, and I want him. I'm picking him specifically there because I think from a Ravens standpoint, he would be higher on their board than Fannin. I don't think the Ravens would consider Fannin in round 2. Okay. So now you can see Savanea is now higher than Banks. And then I would say, well, I think Booker would also be higher than Banks, so I am actually going to select Booker. I see a lot of you online. If you're here, feel free to stop in and say hi. Just drop something into the chat. Okay. So if I went Booker in round 1, would they go Bond in round 2, or do you think they would do Xavier Watts? I think Xavier Watts is a higher rated player, so that's who I'm going to take. Right? Trying to focus on establishing the order of the players, and other people that will use the simulator will see, as I'm maybe moving the board around a little bit here. So then, okay, so we've got those guys. Is there any other guards we would look at in round 1? I don't like Ratledge in round 1. What does the tackle board look like? I would go Milam in round 1. So I'm going to pick Milam here. Okay. Would they go Bond? Like if the board were to look like this and they did Milam, I think they would go Bond over Besh. And if I look at the wide receiver board, would they go Higgins over Bond? I am going to say Higgins in this case. Okay, so I have done 9 of the 10 unique 2-round drafts. So this will be the final, right? So I've done 9 of the 10. I've just started doing the 10th. Okay, and you can see that the players I picked, Milam, Jackson, Savanea, Booker, and I wanted Jackson to be highest. So I'm going to pick Jackson again. And anytime I pick a player, they move up. Okay. And then would they do Hairston or Bond, knowing that they need a corner? And I like Hairston, so that's who I'm going to pick. Okay. So let's change a couple of other teams. So Alfred Collins is another player I'd like to talk about. So let's do Alfred Collins to Green Bay. Okay. So we pick Green Bay, second round challenge. And my goal is to get Alfred Collins to Green Bay. Okay. And if we look, Green Bay is right before Minnesota. So let's look. So Alfred Collins, he's 46th on the board right now. So I'm going to pick him to Green Bay. And then in the second round for Green Bay, I'm likely thinking corner. So you can see Trey Amos. And again, those players got there because fans have picked them. So they're sitting right at the top. So Amos to Green Bay, round 2. You can see Collins moved up a little bit, so I'm going to keep picking Collins. Okay. Hairston to Green Bay in round 2. I have talked to some Packers draft people that think Hairston to Green Bay in round 1 is on the table. So Hairston to Green Bay in round 2 sounds like really good value. Okay. So Collins slowly moving up. Each time I pick him, he's moving up a little bit. So the second round challenge is there for a lot of different reasons. So one is it gives a user a chance to manipulate the board or implement their first and second round board. Another is that it does give some good discussion points, in my opinion, on which prospects a team would consider. Because some people like Trey Harris better, some people like Jack Bech better. For example, it allows you to pick the players you like and move them up, and it means that other fans will be mock drafting on the site against your picks. Okay, so what would the Packers be doing if all the corners are off the board? No Williams, maybe, so I will pick him. Okay, Collins is already 25th on the Packers board, so I've already moved him up to 25th. Okay, so the next position I'm going to look at is edge. Okay, edges. Kennard definitely fits the Green Bay prototype for an edge. Collins was up to 22 on their board. So this is the 6th 2-round draft of a second round challenge. And what I'm doing is using a technique where I typically take the same player in round 1 over and over again. The definition of a second round challenge says that the second round pick has to be unique. So I can't pick the same player in round 2 twice. I can only pick the same player in round 1. The second round pick of a second round challenge has to be unique. Okay, so in this case, I have done 7 of the 10 unique 7 of the 10 unique 2-round drafts. And so you can see Collins is, again, he's slowly moving up. But like in this case, for him to move higher than Michael Williams after 10, so there's a top 10 player that's dropping. I don't think that I will be able to get Collins to go higher than Williams here. Okay, so probably not there. So linebackers that meet no. Okay, so let's look at wide receivers. I think Felton would meet the athletic criteria that they like. And this is tough because I have to put a Green Bay hat on, and I am not a Packers fan. So I can only assume that I know what their athletic thresholds are. I'm trying to pick players that I think match their athletic thresholds, but I am sure if any Packers fan watches this, they might tell me that, Felton doesn't have those athletic thresholds. Go Izaraku here. Okay, so again, I've gotten Collins all the way up to 16th on the board. And that 10th pick was Isaiah Bond. Okay, so I've picked Collins 10 straight times. Let's look at another team. I'm going to actually do the Titans at the top of the draft. So let's do a second round challenge for the Titans, and we will call it a day. So for the Titans, I'm going to move Shedeur Sanders to the top of their board if he isn't already. So I'm going to assume that the Titans go quarterback. So I'm going to go Shedeur Sanders to the Titans. And I will pick Shedeur in round 1 every time. And then in round 2, so what else do they need? So they need wide receivers. Okay. So what wide receivers would it be? Well, I do know that one of the Titans guys really likes Trey Harris. So I will say Sanders Harris. The second round pick here will have to be unique every time. So you can see Sanders is now already higher than Ward. He's moved up to 3. And each time I pick Sanders, he should move up just a little bit. And let's talk about some edges. So I like Kyle Kennard. Each time you pick a player, it moves them up. Anybody ranked higher moves slightly down. Okay, so I'm going to pick Sanders again. And his second round challenge is 10 unique 2-round drafts. So in this case, I am about to finish my third of the 10. And I have 7 more to go. So notice how Sanders is now the top player on their board. Okay. That happened because I just kept picking him over and over and over again. Okay. So if fans are doing normal mock drafts on the site, that will also work. The biggest issue is the number of mouse clicks it's going to take you, to do a 2, 3, or 4 round mock, complete it, then go in and do another one. A second round challenge just spins those mocks back to back to back to back, and they are linked. And I will show you how they're linked here in a minute. When we get to number 9, I'll show you how they're linked. Just observe that my second round picks have been Trey Harris, Kyle Kennard, Braden Swinson, JT Tuimoloau. Okay. And that one was Igbokwe. So let's go Shedeur here. Couple of other players to pay attention to. Let's look to see if Xavier Watts is here. So if Xavier Watts is there, he would be under consideration. I think the Titans have bigger needs than safety, but if Xavier Watts falls to round 2, I think you have to at least consider him. So another player, let's see if Alfred Collins fell. I'm looking to see if Collins goes in round 1. Okay. So I think Collins is going to be here. Yep. And then let's look to see if some corners are here. So we'll do Sanders, and then we will look at the corner board. I'm looking at Porter, Amos, Azareye'h Thomas. So I see, obviously, Amos is off the board there. So what corners? So I see Porter here, and I see Thomas up above. So the idea is the more you pick players, the more they move up. So obviously tougher to do in round 2 because when you do a second round challenge, you can only pick a player once. That's the rules. That's how I designed the algorithm. So like in this one, you can see Amos did drop. He's right there. So I'm going to pick him. And ultimately, this is how you can enforce your board. So let's say you want a specific type of corner. You'd rather have a slot corner than a boundary corner, or you want a certain type of receiver. You want a slot receivers versus a big body receiver. When you do this, you can bias your picks to only pick the slot corners or the slot receivers, and it's not just a linear board. It's a board that is specific to how you see the player and how they fit the team that you're drafting for. So that last one was Azareye'h Thomas. And we finished that for the Titans. So if you look by the end, Shedeur Sanders is an A+. If you look at the beginning, he was only an A. The A+ means that the player was at the top of the draft card during that simulation. Okay, so I'm trying to think of maybe any other player that I could move up. So, yeah, why don't we talk about the Buccaneers taking Trey Harris in round 1? Okay, so if the Buccaneers, and I do a second round challenge, I'm going to take Trey Harris and move Trey Harris all the way up the board for the Buccaneers. And this will be the last demonstration that I do, and we'll close out the podcast. And one of the there's a lot of reasons I do this, but one of the reasons I do this is I definitely want to give the site mock some variety. I don't want every team always taking the same players in round 1. So this helps me flip the boards. And then obviously if fans come in and they do mocks and they change the players that I have going to the team, that's what I want. But ultimately, it's kind of a way for me to measure to see if I come in next week and see that Harris isn't the top player for the Buccaneers, I have an idea of who Buccaneers fans picked or who users of the simulator wanted to go to the Buccaneers. And then I should also do some corners to Tampa Bay because I do think that they would be very likely to take a corner as well. So let's look at the corner board. Definitely Hairston. Okay, and if you look, Harris has moved up to 33rd on the board for the Buccaneers. The more I pick him, the more he moves up. This is true for any player. The more you pick them, the higher they move. If you pick a player in round 4, he's only going to get as high as a round 4 player could get, right? Because there's a bunch of players that were already drafted ahead of him. So it was Darian Porter. So that was, if you look, what I've done is Harris Izaraku, Harris Swinson, Harris Hairston, Harris Porter. This is my 5th mock for the Buccaneers. And let me show you what it's doing in round 2, because this is kind of clever. At least it was kind of clever to me with how I chose to design it. So if you look before the Buccaneers picks, I took Izaraku, I took Swinson, I took Hairston, I took Porter. It makes sure that the players that I mocked in a previous round 2 are off the board before my next round 2 pick. So it's just a series of 2-round mocks that are connected, making sure you can't take the same player in round 2. And again, I'm looking to see if there's any other Azare Thomas right there. And I saw no Williams available. So trying to take any players that I think the Buccaneers would target, and it's going to move them up the board. Now, for a player to get to the top of a round 2 board, you're going to need to take them between 10 and 20 times in round 2 for them to be that A-plus player that is at the top of the board. So you notice I have to kind of hunt and peck for the players that I'm looking for. So they're not at the top, which means that there haven't been a lot of Buccaneers mocks where people are taking a specific corner. So part of what I'm also doing is encouraging that process by doing this. Okay, so let's look at corner. Any other round 2 corners there? I don't see any. Round 2, I don't see any. I'm going to give a shout out to Mello Dotson. It's probably closer to a round 3 corner, but this is the back of round 2 because the Buccaneers were a playoff team. So I'll allow that. So this is my 9th. I'm looking over here, round 1, iteration 9. This is my 9th consecutive 2-round draft, and I've only gotten Harris to go up to 15th on the Buccaneers board. So in this case, I don't think I'm going to get Harris to go to the top. He's going to be close, but he will not be the top player. And then let's look at defensive line. Let's go TJ Sanders, round 2. I mean, I know they have Kalijah Kancey, but there is value. I think Sanders in that case was just too low. And if he's there in round 2 and the other guys weren't there. Okay, so now Harris is not higher than Burden, but we will check this at the end. And let's look for, I see Darius Alexander there, bigger body defensive tackle. Okay, that should round that out. So, okay. So you can see Harris starts as a D, but by the last mock, his grade was an A. Okay. So the player grades will improve as you pick them more. Okay. Here's how we can tell. Let's go to the team needs. And we're going to scroll to the Buccaneers and the team needs and find their player board. So we scroll, Tampa Bay. Here's their player list. And what I want to see is who's higher, Burden or Harris. And they're going to be right around 10 or 12 on the player board. So you can see here's Trey Harris. Burden is dropped to 14. So now Harris is higher. So here's just a real quick test here. Let's do a 1-round mock for Kansas City at the back right here. So I'll pick Kansas City. I'll enter the draft. And let's pay attention to who each team picked. So Shedeur went first overall, and my 2nd-round challenge was the one that put him there. Okay. I don't know that I did any other team that high. Okay. And then another team that we did in this podcast. So Malachi Starks went to Tampa Bay. It was not Trey Harris. Alfred Collins went to Green Bay. Nick Emmanwori went to the Vikings. Shamar Stewart went to the Ravens. It was not Donovan Jackson. And then what would I do here? I think I would go Azari Thomas. Just finish that. Okay, so that was a 50-minute podcast. That was an explanation of how to use a second-round challenge to manipulate a team's player board. A second-round challenge is 10 unique two-round mocks. So have some fun with it. This is the fans' simulator. The fans control who their teams select in a mock draft. So the second-round challenge is a really good way to seed a bunch of players for round 2 because you don't always know who's going to be available or who, a different team prefers. So it gives you a chance to kind of seed 10 players for your team's second-round pick. You would likely need to do, if you wanted to control the second-round pick, you would need to do close to 10 second-round challenges to get your guys to go to the top of the second round. Okay? 1 or 2 second-round challenges will get your guys to go to the top of the first. But you'll probably need to do somewhere between 5 to 10, maybe 15 second-round challenges because you'll need to pick a player somewhere between 5 and 15 times in round 2 to see him go to the top. So my name's Jim. On behalf of the 32 podcasters at the Draft Professor, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow. Thank you for watching this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, the Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on X at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. Please follow the Draft Professor channel on YouTube at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. We look forward to seeing you on our podcast tomorrow.